On Sunday, June 27, 1976,
Air France Flight 139 service from Tel Aviv to Paris, connecting in Athens,
took off with 256 passengers and 12 crew. In Athens, the majority of the passengers from Tel Aviv stayed on the flight. However, it would soon be clear that the plane would not be landing in Paris. Just after reaching cruising altitude, a German man and woman and two Arab men got up from their seats, pulling out several knives, guns, and bombs out to take control over the passengers. The terrorists were supporters under the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and were under the command of Wadi Haddad. Back in Tel Aviv, security precautions had been tighter than usual because of recent alleged hijack attempts. The hijackers avoided this by going through security in Bahrain, then flying to Athens, which allowed them to enter the airport already in the terminal. The terrorists wanted to avoid any security so that they wouldn't alarm anyone with their suspiciously hefty luggage. Alright, back to the plane. The terrorists stormed the cockpit and redirected the course of the flight from Paris to Benghazi, Libya. The stop in Benghazi was to release a pregnant British woman and refuel the jet. Next, the hijackers commanded the plane to Entebbe, Uganda. Once the plane reached Entebbe Airport, the hostages were brought into the terminal where they were greeted by Ugandan President Idi Amin, his entourage of guards, and 6 more Palestinian terrorists. There, Idi Amin claimed to the hostages that he would be the intermediary for the terrorists and Israel. Shortly after that, all non-Israeli hostages were released. The remaining 105 hostages consisted of 12 crew and the rest Israelis. They were kept away in the old 3-story commercial terminal on the first floor. Every single point of exit and entry was defended by the 10 terrorists who were all armed with guns and explosives. But all of these weapons can't be coming from 4 suitcases. While Idi Amin claimed himself to just be the communicator, it was clear he was more than that. Not only did he tolerate this hostage situation, he supported it. Idi Amin practically joined the terrorists by supplying firearms and dozens of his Ugandan soldiers. After the pregnant Englishwoman was let off in Benghazi, she reported the hijacking to local officials, but the news would now spread globally. On June 29th, 2 days after the hijacking, Ugandan President Idi Amin broke the 2-day silence and relayed the terrorists' ultimatum. Idi Amin was known to be anti-Israel, and during this broadcast, he reinforced his support for the Palestinian mission. By Wednesday, June 30th, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin assembled the Israeli cabinet to evaluate the situation and discuss the terrorists' ultimatum. The terrorists demanded the release of 53 imprisoned Palestinians. 40 of those were being held in Israel. If they weren't released before midday July 1st, only 48 hours after the demand was broadcasted, the terrorists would blow up the plane and kill all of the hostages. At first, Israel tried to resolve this diplomatically. However, Uganda's stubbornness to settle only left Israel with one option: force. Israel realized that there wouldn't be a peaceful resolution, and they needed to physically rescue all 105 hostages. They had to act quick, clever, and secretly. Shh. This meant that the plan had to be a secret for the whole world in order for the terrorists and Ugandans not to find out. This was unlike any situation for the Israeli Defense Force. They had never acted outside of the Middle East, they didn't have a protocol for hostages, and they never had such a short time frame. Upon their release, the non-Israeli ex-hostages immediately reported to the IDF that the hostages were being kept in the old terminal and that the terrorists had set their termination date to July 4th. With only less than 4 days to rescue 105 hostages, the IDF started to gather intelligence, and the clock was ticking. An Israeli construction company called Solel Boneh actually built the Entebbe airport. They would supply all of the blueprints to the IDF. Also, the US sent a stealth plane to get multiple aerial photos of the complex. After having access to every dimension of the airport, the IDF replicated the old terminal to simulate the raid. Here's where the IDF gets real clever. They realized the only way to beat the Ugandans was to be the Ugandans. In less than 3 days, they created a replica of President Idi Amin's black Mercedes limo, as well as the vehicles that usually follow that in the motorcade. The IDF would also recreate the Ugandans' uniforms, and some of the soldiers would actually paint their face black. But here's the problem. Entebbe is over 2,000 miles away from Israel. The IDF arranged 4 Lockheed C-130 Hercules planes to sneak them into Entebbe. These planes would carry several combat vehicles, the Ugandan motorcade, and 200 IDF personnel. However, the fourth Hercules would fly in empty, as it was designated to carry the hostages back. The Israeli Air Force would also disguise 2 of their Marshall Boeings as airliners from El Al to not arouse any unnecessary suspicion. One Boeing would act as a flying hospital, and the other would act as a mobile command center. To maximize efficiency, groups of soldiers were formed and then assigned a specific objective, such as guarding the plane or charging the terminal. In preparation, the IDF had been studying air traffic patterns to eliminate any chances of complication. For the entire flight, the Hercules planes would fly so low that they couldn't even be picked up by radar. After almost a week of non-stop planning, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin gave what was known as Operation Thunderbolt the green light. On midday, July 3rd, the 4 Hercules planes took off from Israel while being followed by the 2 Boeings. The 2 Boeings diverted to Nairobi to prepare the makeshift hospital and control center. Roughly 7 hours after takeoff, at 11:03 p.m., the first Hercules landed only 30 seconds behind schedule at Entebbe. This Hercules was carrying the presidential motorcade along with Commander Yonatan Netanyahu. Before the plane had even touched down, the motorcade had already started their engines. Upon touchdown, the first Hercules confirmed they had landed with the code word, "I am ready, Waller." Just as the plane came to a stop, the motorcade drove out the back and straight to the control tower. Ugandan soldiers were saluting the limo left and right because they believed it was the Ugandan president. When the Israelis got out of the car to seize the tower, Ugandan guards realized what was happening, so the Israelis shot them with their silenced pistols. Even though these pistols were silenced, it still caused a substantial commotion. They had blown their cover. They managed to organize the arrivals of the next 3 planes and then rapidly drove towards the terminal. The crew was forced to run roughly 40 yards across gunfire to reach the terminal. Every soldier but one made it. Within 20 to 30 seconds of entering the terminal, all 10 terrorists were killed. Simultaneously, the next 2 support planes landed just 6 minutes after the first plane. Now the empty 4th plane was coming in. To ensure their escape, light armored personnel carriers were used to destroy several of Uganda's MiG fighter jets and other artillery. All of the hostages had been rescued within 20 minutes of the first plane landing, and then the fleet successfully evacuated. From the first touchdown to the last takeoff, the mission was only 40 minutes. The fleet then went to Nairobi, where the injured were treated at the makeshift hospital, and all 6 planes refueled. On the morning of July 4th, 1976, the entire fleet returned back to Israel. In total, 7 of the 10 Palestinian terrorists were killed, with 3 being taken away for questioning, and 45 Ugandan soldiers were killed. While a couple of hostages were injured, only 3 died and only 1 soldier was killed amidst the gunfire. That 1 soldier being Commander Yonatan Netanyahu, the older brother of Israel's current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Upon the return to Israel, the people began to celebrate and unite under their nation. With full support from its citizens after Entebbe, defense became Israel's prime concern, especially regarding the Palestinian conflicts. With that being said, other nations considered Israel's pounce controversial, even sparking disagreements at the United Nations over whether the raid was justified. While most countries sided with Israel on the basis that they were defending their people, others, such as the Somalian ambassador, believed that this was an act of aggression and a violation of territorial integrity. As Israel had been founded only 28 years before, this mission of unprecedented rigor would ultimately boost Israel's legitimacy as a global power. So, whenever you feel like you can't get anything done during a history period, remember that a lot can be done in 40 minutes.